Caught between my parents' bitter divorce. I was torn apart when my mom remarried and my new step-siblings tried to erase my existence, leaving me devastated. My parents have never concealed the fact that my sister, Helen, has always been the best child in the family. The youngest of my parents' children, she was considered their miracle child. Despite having serious health issues, my parents have been trying for years to have another child after me. My parents were effectively told to give up on growing their family after my mother experienced problems following my delivery, which prompted physicians to advise against getting pregnant again. But my mother defied all expectations and got pregnant again 5 years later. For my father, who was thrilled about the possibility of having another child, this news was nothing short of a miracle. This position as a miracle baby had a significant impact on my sister's upbringing and the way my parents regarded her. They have always treated her like a queen, going above and beyond to make sure she has the finest of everything. Her unique position within the family was further cemented by the lavish celebration of each of her accomplishments and milestones. It was obvious to everyone, including me, that my sister had a special and elevated place in our parents' affections since this partiality was never covert. Rather, it was publicly expressed and accepted. Not to be misunderstood, my parents also made sure I had all I needed. However, their treatment of me frequently seemed like an afterthought. For example, school functions. My parents would always choose to go to my sister's function if we had activities on the same day. As if my wants and occurrences were somehow less significant, they would explain that she was the youngest and so required them more. My parents still treasure the innumerable childhood photos of my sister that are painstakingly arranged in albums. They haven't even saved one of my albums, on the other hand, saying that my photos were lost in a storm. I would have liked to see how I grew up, therefore I wish they could have at least saved a couple photos. When my early life wasn't kept the same way as my sister's, it's difficult to avoid feeling like an afterthought. When I was growing up, my sister Helen's problems, no matter how minor, were promptly addressed and fixed. However, my father would brush me off and label me spoiled if I ever complained or wanted something. My mother would reprimand me for being more confident like my sister and accuse me of being overly theatrical if I ever felt nervous about trying new things or approaching strangers. I always felt that my sister's worries and emotions were more important than mine because of the way my parents treated me. Then came the game of blame. I was also held accountable for my sister's activities if she ever committed a transgression. My parents say that since I was the eldest, I ought to have taught her to be better. Because of my birth order, I was always held accountable, even if I had nothing to do with her behavior. This unwarranted ongoing blaming made me even more of the underdog and made me live in perpetual shadow of my sister. Helen didn't help either. She was well aware of how to take advantage of her status as the favorite child and frequently used it to outdo me or get away with things. She would often coerce me into letting her use my possessions or put on my clothes without my consent during even the most minor arguments. She would go to our parents and complain if I ever ventured to object, accusing me of being conceited and self-centered. I would unavoidably receive criticism for not sharing and be made to feel guilty in every circumstance. But Helen's actions were distinctly biased. She was always very protective of her belongings and never let me touch them. We shared a room for a long time, and she aggressively protected her side and possessions. The dynamic remained the same even after we went into different rooms. She was quite particular about her belongings, but she always wanted me to be understanding and giving with mine. It was discouraging and frustrating to experience this double standard. I always felt alone and underappreciated because of Helen's ability to control circumstances to her advantage and my parents' steadfast support of her. They believed Helen could do no wrong, while I was always in the wrong, regardless of what I did. I had severe depression as a result of my parents' and sister's behavior. As a teenager, I experienced severe problems with my self-image and my confidence began to decline. Particularly when Helen would argue with me or make fun of me, the tension was unbearable. I was constantly on edge due to my fear of confrontation, and I frequently felt like I was about to have a panic attack because of my parents' combative yelling. I would feel as though I was choking beneath the weight of their disappointment and rage when they approached too close during their outbursts. My family didn't seem to be aware of or concerned about my difficulties. With no one to turn to for help, I felt like an animal in a cage, caught in a vicious cycle of mental and emotional suffering. Writing down my thoughts in a journal was therefore the only thing that gave me comfort. I would write my heart out on those pages every night, sharing my sorrows, disappointments, and anxieties. It was the only setting where I felt free to be totally open about my situation. It gave me some serenity and allowed me to process the pandemonium around me. Because I was worried that Helen may discover the journal and make fun of my weaknesses, I always kept it hidden beneath my bed. My worst nightmare came true one day. While I was out, Helen, who had a tendency of prying into my room even though I had repeatedly asked her to leave, discovered my journal. My one haven must have been violated when she read through its contents. My parents and Helen were seated in the living room with particularly serious expressions when I got home that evening. Given their solemn looks, I assumed there might have been a death in the family and inquired about their well-being. In order to speak with me, my dad asked me to sit down. As I obeyed, my heart began to race and I had a bad sensation in my stomach. Then, from behind her, my mother took my journal. When I demanded to know what she was doing with my journal, my eyes dilated in amazement and disbelief. While my mother gave me an unusually serious look and inquired as to whether what I had written actually expressed my innermost sentiments, Helen simply grinned, taking pleasure in my pain. I felt completely exposed and deceived at that very moment. My notebook had been my lone haven, where I could vent my suffering and annoyance without worrying about criticism or mockery. My deepest, innermost thoughts were now exposed to the very people who inspired me to compose them. I was overcome by the seriousness of the situation, and while I fought to react, I could feel a panic attack coming. Yes, it did reflect my thoughts, I said gently, adding that they had no right to read it. My father shook his head and informed me that they were really worried about me if what I had written was accurate. He went on to add that after reading my journal, they felt that I was a psychopath who needed assistance because of the hatred they thought I had for them, and I gazed at them in confusion. I was shocked beyond belief. I had never said anything harsh about my sister or my parents in my whole journal. All I had done was write down the feelings and experiences their acts had given me over the years. But here they were, turning my sincere thoughts into something evil. For keeping a notebook, my parents began accusing me of writing such dark things, and even calling me a psychopath. My mother continued by accusing me of making things up to fill the book and saying that neither she nor my father had ever treated me in this manner. I needed serious help, she insisted, before I harmed someone. Helen went so far as to comment that she was ashamed to call me her sister after reading my notebook, since my actions were clearly not normal. Retorting that I had done nothing wrong and that I had not written anything negative about them, I attempted to defend myself. I clarified that they had no authority to condemn me based on my personal reflections because the notebook was only about my life. My family, however, was obsessed with their story that something was wrong with me and didn't care about my explanations. In front of them, I felt so vulnerable and exposed. They seemed to have taken away the last remnant of my privacy and turned it against me. The very following day, my parents informed me that I needed serious help before things turned south, and that they would be taking me to see a psychiatrist. It was obvious that they perceived me as the issue because of the disdain and misdirected worry in their statements. I experienced a crippling sense of powerlessness and betrayal. Instead of admitting the pain and harm they had caused, it seemed as though they were intent on making me the issue and changing the course of events. I was deeply hurt by the betrayal, and their reaction made me feel even more alone and powerless than I had already felt. I felt quite uneasy and guilty at first when I started seeing a psychiatrist, as though I had actually done something wrong. I was ashamed to express my thoughts, as I had accepted the notion that I was the problem in my family. My psychiatrist recognized my hesitancy and attempted to close the distance by using my notebook. I felt more at ease and was able to open up when she read entries from it and asked me questions based on what I had written. Since it had always been easier for me to express myself on paper than in person, The journal was a useful tool throughout our meetings. But as I was getting married to the love of my life, everything changed. My parents contacted me after learning about my impending nuptials via cousins and other family members. They were obviously shocked to be left out of such a significant event in my life. They made an unexpected call. They reluctantly expressed sorry for their previous actions and acknowledged their wrongdoings. Since I was going to have a family of my own, they acknowledged that even though they couldn't alter the past, they still wanted to make new memories with me. They pleaded with me to pardon them and let them share in this new phase of my life. Their apologies was a surprising turn of events that had me face a variety of feelings. I chose to forgive them and invite my parents to my wedding since I was starting a new chapter in my life. In addition, they asked my sister to come, but I flatly refused and they didn't pursue the matter. In retrospect, I'm glad I invited my parents, who had a great time at the wedding. The decision seemed natural since they were truly thrilled for my husband and myself. Since then, I've tried to occasionally go over to my parents' house for supper in order to catch up. I occasionally have to talk to my sister on these visits. She still attempts to enrage me by making insensitive remarks about my marriage or my family, but I always make sure to confront her conduct head-on and correct her. Helen has only grown more resentful of me over the years, particularly after learning that I get along better with my in-laws than she does with her husband's family. Her in-laws have never truly embraced her into their family and apparently still hate her. She tries to put them down by making subtle remarks about my spouse or my in-laws. She expresses her annoyance and discontent with her personal situation through these comments. Helen keeps making these harsh remarks despite my dad's repeated observations of her behavior and his request for her to cease. I was told I was pregnant 4 months ago. My spouse and I are ecstatic about the news. He makes twice as much as I do, so we agreed that I should take a temporary leave of absence to concentrate on the pregnancy. My spouse and my in-laws, who have been quite sympathetic and supportive along this process, fully backed this decision. My sister was incensed when she learned that I had chosen to quit my career in order to stay at home with my unborn child. Because they needed both of their earnings to make ends meet, her husband never permitted her to be a stay-at-home mother, which was the source of her rage. Helen never had the opportunity to unwind or take a break during her pregnancy, unlike me. As a result, whenever we get together, she criticizes my choice to express her displeasure. She has referred to me as foolish and suggested that being a stay-at-home mom is humiliating. On multiple occasions, I have just laughed off her comments and told her that I had years of experience and could go back to work whenever I chose. Helen, however, has attempted to manipulate the issue by claiming that I should never have given up on my profession and that my husband is being domineering. This strikes me as ironic because I chose to leave my job. I am aware that her attempts to discredit my choice are obviously motivated more by her personal discontent with her life than by any genuine criticism of my decisions. I have made every effort to avoid her in order to preserve my mental health and give my whole attention to enjoying my pregnancy. My sister contacted me a week ago to invite me to a dinner party she was throwing. She wanted my spouse and I to go, and she intended to invite her in-laws and our whole family. I viewed this dinner gathering as a welcome diversion and an opportunity to mingle, as I hadn't gone out much since my pregnancy. I was more motivated to go since I reasoned that my sister would probably pay less attention to me, with so many people around. Although I consented to go, things didn't work out that night. My spouse had to work late into the night to finish some last-minute chores. He was already under a lot of stress, and he kept apologizing to me for being late to work. I didn't hold it against him, because I knew that these things may happen. We were already running late for the dinner party when he finally arrived to pick me up. I thought it was better to be late than not at all, so I chose not to cancel despite the delay. As soon as we got to my sister's house, I saw that most of the people there had already eaten dinner and were chatting casually. My dad doesn't feel comfortable driving at night, so even my parents went after supper. My sister chastised us for being late right away, and although I didn't blame her for being irritated, I took the initiative to apologize on my husband's behalf because he was obviously humiliated by the circumstance. I was relieved when Helen ushered my husband to a chair and brought him a plate of food, but she drew me aside and led me into the kitchen. There she disclosed that there was no food left for me because everyone had already consumed their second or even third helping. This realization surprised me, especially since I was already really hungry and felt even more so because I was pregnant. I was disappointed, but I decided not to dispute or voice my displeasure. I told her that I could just order something online because I knew that our tardiness had caused this trouble. I could still eat in this manner without creating any more trouble. It was nice of her to nod and offer to order me something. However, she informed me that the least I could do tonight was wash the dishes because I had arrived so late and hadn't contributed much during the evening. I was surprised when she asked. I sneered and informed her that I hadn't anticipated being asked to work for her just because I was late for the dinner party invitation. Because I was late, I thought it was ridiculous to expect me to clear her visitors' plates. She reacted quickly and angrily. As her sister, I should be helping her, especially since she's been cooking so much all day. She shot out in a low, angry tone. She said that as my mother had assisted her in serving the guests at dinner, I should do the same because I was related. Helen made it clear that she wanted my assistance because her husband was never helpful in the kitchen. I countered that Helen shouldn't have invited so many people if she was feeling overburdened. She responded angrily and contemptuously, telling me that the least I could do was to keep quiet and provide her a hand because I would never be able to comprehend her predicament. In a scathing comment, she went on to say that it wasn't a huge problem if I assisted her as well because, now that I was pregnant, I was just a pathetic waitress for my husband at home. Her scathing remarks caught me off guard and were really painful. The weight of her remarks caused tears to build up in my eyes, adding to my already present feelings of hunger and emotional vulnerability. I hurried into one of Helen's bedrooms and closed the door behind me because I didn't want her to see me in distress. I had to locate a place where I could gather myself. Once inside, the usual feeling of being unable to breathe was overwhelming, and I could feel my old panic attack beginning to reemerge.